For all the clamoring there was for a third Ghostbusters movie, but for one that was a sequel to the original two films, it seems with this, for many people, Sony didn't answer the call. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my Ghostbusters review series, where I go through all three of the Ghostbusters movies leading up to my review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. And today we're talking about the reboot Ghostbusters 2016. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it and let's talk about Ghostbusters 2016. This focuses on two paranormal enthusiasts, a nuclear engineer, and a subway worker who band together to stop an otherworldly threat following a ghostly invasion of Manhattan. Also known as Ghostbusters Answer the Call, this is a gender-swapped reboot of the franchise, and it sees Paul Feig take over as both director and co-writer. And we now have Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones take on the main four roles. And similar to the first movie, this feels like a film that needs no introduction, though for all the wrong reasons, mainly because this one was met with a ton of controversy the second it was announced. For one thing, it's no secret that a third entry in the Ghostbusters franchise was in development hell for years after the second film in 1989. Despite the fact that fans clamored for it and there was talks by Dan Aykroyd that it was being worked on, they could never get it off the ground, mainly due to Bill Murray not wanting to participate in it, both because of how poorly the second film did and because of his falling out with Harold Ramis after they made Groundhog Day. And while Murray and Ramis eventually reconciled, it was still too late, as in 2014, Harold Ramis unfortunately passed away, seemingly dashing all hopes for a new movie, or at least one that would see everyone reunite. So instead of choosing to do a third movie within the main continuity, Sony decided to reboot the franchise and focus on an entirely new set of characters in a gender-swapped remake. And despite the involvement of Paul Feig, who was behind Freaks and Geeks, Bridesmaids, and multiple other well-received comedies, along with the cast, some of whom have previously worked with him and were acclaimed for their respective comedic skills, this received a ton of negative backlash. The trailer was one of the most disliked trailers on YouTube, and people were trying to tank the IMDb rating before they even saw the movie. Now, there was of course some legitimate disappointment by fans who had hoped for maybe a pass the torch sort of movie with the remaining original Ghostbusters, but those concerns were greatly overshadowed by the sheer hatred this received from some of the more toxic fans who just wanted to hate the movie, mainly due to just the notion that it was a gender-swapped remake. And yes, it's worth noting, toxic fandoms within big franchises are a huge problem. I don't talk about them a lot, but we see them come out of the woodworks whenever it comes to any major media franchise. And this one is no different, unfortunately, where people just get absolutely malicious if there's something that isn't exactly 110% what they asked for. It's aggravating to say the least, it's counterproductive, and it winds up drawing attention away from any real substantive discussions we can have on a new movie, show, or whatever. And that's what happened here, where it's more famous now for just how much people hated it before they even saw it, rather than for anything we actually saw in the movie. Now, while it's disappointing this isn't the long-awaited third entry we were hoping for, I still went into this hoping for the best, as I try not to be someone who hates something different just for the sake of it. And it turns out, it was actually okay. It's definitely not great. It's not a new comedy classic or anything, and I do have some issues with it, but it's by no means a bad movie, or one that was even remotely close of deserving all the hatred it got. In fact, there's actually one area where I feel this definitely improved over the original, and that's the effects. As much as I love the original, I think we can all agree that the effects there are a product of their time. I do appreciate a lot of the practical stuff that was used, but some of the effects that required animation clearly look a little dated. But here, everything looks crisp and clear, and it doesn't have that oversaturated feel we tend to get with films that rely on CGI where they just look fake. I like the look a lot of the ghosts, the new monsters we were introduced, and there were still some practical effects thrown in there to give the more fantastical elements a little bit of authenticity, but all the digital stuff was polished nicely, and I thought the film looked pristine in that regard. And then, similar to the first two films, a lot of the charm relies on the talent of its cast, and they're all solid here for the most part. I think the chemistry among all four of our leads was great, with a lot of ad-libbing and riffing among all of them, which is something I was happy about because, again, while I love the original team, it did feel like they gave all of the funniest lines to Bill Murray, who, to be fair, did ad-lib a lot of the lines himself. But even so, as far as what was actually written, I don't think the other three were quite written as funny as he was. But this time around, they tried to have everyone get their moments where they can just go on these tangents and riff on one another, like when they talk about food or when they wind up talking over one another and become overly apologetic because of it. Stuff like that worked, and it was nice to see everyone get their chance to have a moment to shine. Now, not all of it works. It's quite obvious a lot of this stuff was just thrown in there for the sake of making a joke, and it would often feel like the film kept making these detours that dragged things on a bit too long, and it caused some of those jokes to fall flat on their face. But there were a number of these sequences that worked, and I got a few good laughs from them. And my two favorites of the four leads were Kate McKinnon, who was given a lot of the more surreal, out there dialogue, along with Leslie Jones, who had the most infectious energy and seemed like she was having an absolute blast with the role. We also have Chris Hemsworth as the secretary named Kevin, who was easily one of the big standouts here, the same way Janine was one of the standouts in the original movies. Chris Hemsworth is someone with such a knack for comedic timing. That's something that was discovered especially in these most recent Marvel movies, where Thor was reimagined as a more comedic character. Now, this was right before that reimagining, but this is another showcase for just how funny he can be. There's essentially just one joke to the character, and that he's sweet, but also really dumb. And sometimes those jokes don't work, but for the most part they do, especially thanks to the way that Hemsworth plays off anything with such deadpan delivery and takes things like a champ, though completely unaware sometimes of what's going on. Those were some of the moments where I was audibly laughing out loud, and it really showcases how hilarious he can be. And while this isn't the pass the torch sort of movie that we would have hoped for, what's good is it was made by a cast and crew who do have fondness for the original, and I did appreciate all the ways it paid tribute to the original. There are a lot of subtle nods, like a bust of Harold Ramis early on, and we do get some cameos from classic monsters, plus we get some fun gags that reference the original, like the firehouse. But most importantly, we get cameos from most of the remaining original cast members. The only other exception besides Ramis who didn't make an appearance was Rick Moranis, who at this point had long since retired. But Dan Aykroyd pops up as a cab driver, Ernie Hudson is Leslie Jones' uncle, Sigourney Weaver is Kate McKinnon's mentor, and they're all very quick. But it's Bill Murray who gets the most amount of screen time in a 5-minute or so role as someone who doesn't believe the Ghostbusters. And that one was fine, where he gets to employ his usual sarcasm, though now channeling it to a more Walter Peck-like role, and it's rare to ever really dislike a Bill Murray performance, even if it's only a cameo. But my favorite was actually Annie Potts, who plays a hotel receptionist who's basically another version of Janine, which didn't give her a whole lot to do, as it's another very quick cameo, but it at least allowed her to show up for a few seconds and do the shtick that made her original character so enjoyable. So there's that. And like I said, it's the work of the entire cast that this winds up working at all, because as far as the script goes, it could have been better. And like I said, I'm not here to hate on this movie just because it's not the original movie. I'm all for doing something different. I just think that in its attempts to do something different, there were a few misguided efforts. The main one being the tone. This does run into some tonal inconsistencies, mainly because when we first meet the characters, we find out that there's a rift among some of them, mainly between Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig, who used to be friends and had a falling out. And when we revisit some of this backstory between them with things like why one of them is called Ghost Girl and getting these reveals that are meant to be emotional, it does throw off the movie at times. I get wanting to give these characters some development and have some emotional impact to their arcs, and I commend that. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done that. I just think that the way it would go from all these extended sequences of riffing and ad-libbing that would go on for a while and then swing so hard in the opposite direction to go through all these sentimental schmaltzy moments, it just didn't work. It would feel tonally jarring, and it caused the movie to maybe go on a bit too long. This is a 2-hour movie, and I know they had cut out a lot of material because there is an extended edition, but even at 2 hours, I think this goes on for a bit too long, mainly for a lot of these overstuffed sequences. I think this should have been like 90 to 100 minutes at most, and it would have flowed so much smoother, mainly by tightening up some of the riffing that didn't work and finding better ways to transition to some of the more emotional moments. Also, the villain was just fine. Neil Casey plays a mad scientist named Rowan, who winds up being the one unleashing the ghosts in New York City through some sort of convoluted plot. And it's okay. It's nothing too memorable, if I had to be quite honest. Like, there was absolutely nothing he said or did that I was able to remember once the movie was over, other than he had this giant plot he concocted, and it resulted in the Ghostbusters chasing him around, and that's what gets us to the big explosive finale in the city. So that was good, as I did enjoy the finale, but as a character, on his own, he was just okay. Ghostbusters 2016 is fine. As a long awaited new installment in the franchise, I don't think it was quite worth the wait. But it is entertaining. While it does suffer from some pacing issues, tonal inconsistencies, and jokes that don't quite land, it's sparked by the chemistry among all four leads, some slick effects, and a lot of loving little tributes to those first two films. While it's not great, I do think it's a pretty good time. Ghostbusters 2016 gets a 6.5 out of 10. It's not great, but it's really not bad. It's by no means deserving of all the hatred it got. Maybe not quite what I had in mind when it came to a new Ghostbusters movie, but this could have been a whole lot worse if you ask me. But with that, stay tuned, as up next will be my review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see Ghostbusters 2016, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you actually think this wasn't bad, or was this something you really didn't care for? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.